the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
Intrafatum.
Remember, if you've got a tip for Melissa, a knock on the door in the middle of the night, headlights at the end of the street, how babies are really made, anything, tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. You just might hear your tip on the podcast. And now here's your host, preparing her manifesto against all who would dare consume Skyline chili when there's a perfectly fine Gold Star right across the street, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell. Yes, producer Mark, we will get to the chili wars momentarily.
Oh, good.
I wanted to explain that intrafatum, INTRAFATUM,
Yes,
is a new color of eyeshadow in a palette that I got.
it sounds like some sort of Latin something.
Yes, I think it is a Latin. The creator of the palette is a wonderful makeup artist named Hindosh, and he is. At first, I thought the words were in Arabic, but it's Latin. You're right, and it means within destiny.
Ooh.
And yeah, and his eyeshadow palette is. This is going to sound like a big sweeping statement, but it could honestly change the makeup game. It's ombre colors, and they gradiate into each other. And intra and fatum, intra is the brown version, and it goes into a matte black, and it's like stepping into the unknown, is how he described it. And it's a first of all, the palette is called Beautopsy. So he is autopsying beauty.
Okay. Now that's kind of clever.
He's amazing.
Right.
Every one of these eyeshadow shades is phenomenal, and they all have interesting different names that are personal to him. But
okay.
It's a really fantastic eyeshadow palette.
All right. Well, just a reminder to our listeners that this is a true crime podcast. It's not a makeup.
It's not.
It's not a makeup podcast. Yeah, but you get makeup tips.
Yeah,
we have bonus content.
Bonus content. Yeah.
Yes.
If you're interested in the Hindosh Beautopsy palette, I just Google it and you'll see the colors. And at first you're like, what? Why did anyone put these on their face? But then when you do, you're like, this is exceptional. Okay, so back to the murdery true crime stuff.
Oh, no, wait. First, we got to talk about the Cincinnati chili wars.
Right. So I'm going to be visiting my hometown. I'm pretty excited about it in the middle of June. And one of the first things I'll do is have a Gold Star cheese and chili sandwich. And those of you who like Skyline, you are dead to me. And producer Mark did not know about the Cincinnati chili fights, the chili wars, which sounds very messy and disgusting.
It does.
Yeah.
But talk about looking like a crime scene.
Yes.
Imagine chili all over the place.
Yes, it's got cinnamon in it. And I met my beloved Lisa had sent me 4 cans of Gold Star chili. And I'd forgotten that, like, right out of the can, it's a little too runny for me. So I strained a lot of the liquid off. And what you are left with is like the most delicious brown goodness.
Okay. All right. I think for most of the people around the world, we need to understand that there's just a tiny part of the United States with Cincinnati in the middle, and it's goes out maybe a couple 100 miles radius, where there is something called Cincinnati chili, which is different than other chili that you're used to tasting. It's not hot, it's not spicy, it's delicious. I think it's delicious. And what Melissa just said. Its secret ingredient is cinnamon. There's a touch of cinnamon in it that makes it taste very...
Potentially a little chocolate.
Maybe a little chocolate. And there are 2 big chains in that area.
Oh, there's more than 2. But you're right. The 2 biggest ones are
Skyline Chili and Gold Star Chili. And
there's Empress and Dixie. And anyway, go ahead.
Right. But the thing is, once you've chosen sides, and you live in the area there, if you've chosen Skyline... everybody who goes to Gold Star is your enemy, and vice versa. Now, Melissa is a Gold Star person.
I am.
So if you tell her that you like Skyline chili, you're dead. You're dead to her. And I don't get it because you know what, folks? They both taste the same.
No, they don't. You stop that.
They do.
That's heresy. That's heresy. You stop that.
Okay.
So I have two chili stories from my time there. One is that when I used to manage the Funny Bone when it was in Covington, the comedy club, Ron White was headlining, and he went on stage, and he's from Texas originally, and he said, my friend Alex, which was Alex Raimondo, one of his best friends, my friend Alex, you guys think you have great chili here in Cincinnati. My friend Alex can show up with a goat and an onion and kick all your asses making chili.
That's good.
A goat and an onion. And then this is one I'm really gonna regret for the rest of my life. Some of you may or may not know that George Clooney is from the sort of northern Kentucky area, a little bit south, Augusta. But he would come home for holidays to see his parents, Nick and Nina. Nick was a local newsman and actually had been a newsman in LA for a while, but didn't fit in here and went back home. And this was early in his career. He was probably maybe starting on, what was that? Facts of Life. That's the show. He was like the George the Handyman on Facts of Life. But there was a precursor to the drama ER called ER, and it was a half-hour comedy with Elliot Gould and pretty big stars. And he was Ace, the ambulance driver. And he had done a 3 or 4 part arc on something called Crazy Like a Fox with Jack Warden, like as a private eye or something. And he was adorable on it. And my mom was a big fan. And this is very early. This is before he becomes George Clooney, right? He was
like a local boy made good,
yeah.
Right?
He sold women's shoes at McAlpin's, the department store, and the women's shoes department. And he was, probably very successful because he was handsome. He's like a year or two older than me. And he went to Northern Kentucky University. And so anyway, my friend Brian ran lights in the DJ booth at a large floating boat called the Waterfront. And if you're from the Cincinnati area, it's the, Jeff Ruby extravaganza. I believe it was based on a large floating disco called Las Brisas. I think that was one of the names of one of the parts of this boat. So I'm there around Christmas time hanging out with my friend Brian, and George Clooney has had a few drinks, and he's there with a buddy. And it's 2:00, and I used to wait for Brian, and after the club would close, we'd go have breakfast at some weird ass place. It still is shocking to me that Cincinnati stays open longer than Los Angeles. I mean, there were after hours places to go have dinner or eat breakfast, whatever, in Cincinnati. And in Los Angeles, you're hard pressed to find anything that's open.
All you got is Denny's.
Yeah, it's so crazy. Drew Hastings, another comic, said New York is the city that never sleeps. LA is the city that never wakes up. And that's kind of the truth. It's very odd here. But so I would wait for Brian. We'd go have breakfast later. George and his buddy are kind of drunkish. And I go up to him and I say, "Are you George Clooney?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "I loved your episodes of Crazy Like a Fox." And he's like, "Nobody saw that." And I'm like, "Well, I did." And I was like, "Can I have your autograph?" And he's like, he is drunk, okay? And he pulls a receipt off of a check off of a cocktail waitress's tray and writes his name sloppily and drew a little picture of like a puppy dog. And he's like, "Hey, we're going to Skyline. Why don't you go with us?" And I said, "No, I hate Skyline."
Are you out of... I've never... Oh my God! I've never heard this story.
Yeah.
You could have had chili with George Clooney.
I could have. But I don't like Skyline.
You know that
my friend Brian can back this story up.
There are now women across the globe.
Look, he wasn't that big yet.
Hearing this, saying,
"I didn't know he was going to be a big star."
You just lost a whole bunch of women.
I know.
You didn't lose. No, you didn't lose fans. They've all passed out. I've never heard that story.
I thought I'd told you.
No,
and you know what makes me really mad? I'm really mad.
Unbelievable.
No, I threw away his autograph.
Oh my!
I know. I was moving apartments, and I threw away his autograph. I'm a terrible person. I didn't know he was going to be that big.
I can't believe it.
I know.
I cannot believe it.
I know.
You could have had chili with George Clooney.
At Skyline.
Oh my God! You could have gulped it down, for God's sake.
I don't know.
You could have had a Coca-Cola.
I could have. But I wanted to go spend time with Brian. It was just some guy who was an actor.
Brian, now I know that Melissa's your true friend.
Yeah.
Because, oh my God.
I've known him since the 7th grade. I love Brian, but still.
Okay.
Gold star forever. So we have 2 wonderful reviews to say thank you for this week. And if you have the time, if you would stop by wherever you're listening, if they offer the option to leave reviews, but we know you can do this on Apple Podcasts. You can leave us a rating, a review that, speaks what you think about what we do here. We would like it if you would subscribe. And if you have any case ideas you would like us to cover, please feel free to email us at jttipsters@gmail.com. Or on our Tipster hotline, you can call us at any time, 832-847-7837. And there is a service called Chartable that lets you know when you get reviews from other countries, because we can't see them. Anything out of the United States we can't see. But once a week, Chartable, if you host a podcast, sends you reviews from other places. And it's so... for the most part, it's so nice to see and hear what others think. And especially this review from Allie. She didn't want us to mention where she works because she said, love you both. I listen to podcasts all day long at work. Please don't mention that part. I just did. Sorry. And your podcast is the reason I haven't retired. And she said, you have the best voice and detail for crimes against good people. Producer Mark is fantastic. And you pulled me in with more cowbell. It's my favorite SNL episode ever. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Allie is from Canada. And that is a huge deal because Canada doesn't like me very much at all. So I am thrilled that Allie wrote such a lovely review. And then we got a beautiful review from...
Wait a minute. They like you.
No, they don't.
They do, but they just don't know about you. That's all.
Oh, okay.
If Allie starts, introducing her friend... Canada's a small country. She doesn't need to introduce her,
A small country?
It's, population-wise.
Oh, okay. It's huge.
It doesn't have a lot of people in it.
Oh,
but,
it's a big landmass. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So start,
Allie, what's wrong with you?
Start the telephone
Get
game
out there.
Or something.
You get out there and you pimp us out, Allie.
Thank you.
In between your full-time job. Anyway, yeah, thank you, Canada. But thank you especially to Allie. And we got a lovely review from Tipster Debbie. And she said, this is something that is so amazingly kind to me. Tipster Debbie was an Android device user, and she went and got a Apple iPad so she could leave a review on Apple Podcast.
Oh my God!
I've never heard of someone who actually buys a new device to leave a review.
To leave a review.
Mm-hmm. That's the kind of person Tipster Debbie is. She's kind of amazing.
Debbie.
Yeah.
All right now.
She's a special human being. And she says, this is my favorite podcast. There are so many reasons why this is a fantastic true crime podcast. The episodes are professionally done. Melissa and producer Mark seem to be talking just to you. That's a huge, huge compliment. The opening banter is so well done. You're probably the only one that thinks that, Debbie, but thank you. With great chemistry and timing, it helps to balance the dark subject matter. The research is done thoroughly, and Melissa doesn't sound like she's simply reading someone else's words. I love this review with all of my heart. And
didn't she also say she liked the fact that we don't play music behind the...
Yes, she said, I don't know why this podcast doesn't have more subscribers. Me too, Debbie. And she said They know not to, this is funny, they know not to play music when speaking. Other podcasts, please take note. So that's right, other podcasts who are much more successful than us. You take notes from us.
No, it's just, here's the deal, Debbie. We don't have a script.
No.
We don't. Melissa has notes and works from extensively researched notes, and we don't have a script, and that's why we don't play the the music in the background.
Well, I mean, that's not every not every podcast does that. Some do, some don't.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, it's not every podcast. So this is a suggestion from another tipster, Debbie, and it is extremely baklava like in its story. It's so layered, and it took me a little while to get to it because I just kept getting deeper and deeper, and then it has a connection to another very large case. It's almost the tale of two different cases, and how one should have been solved but maybe wasn't because of the situation and maybe who is involved, and another case that absolutely should have been solved and it took a long time because of who was involved. Both of these cases involve potentially crimes committed by police officers, and there's nothing that I want to talk about less than something like this, and it's something that's too big to not talk about. And everything under this umbrella is heartbreaking. But the fact that Catherine Braley's case has not been solved is another crime. It's a crime that it has not been solved. In the broadest sense, it is a crime. Tipster Debbie has an intimacy with this case in that she worked with the victim. And not for long, because Catherine Braley had been only a few weeks, maybe a month, had been working at the same place that Tipster Debbie did. And just to add another layer, Tipster Debbie has had more in her life than the allotment that we should be allowed. Tipster Debbie is involved intimately in another case that she was very close friends with. Another case that we've covered of a victim. Well, we don't know where he is, but we know he's probably not still with us. So Tipster Debbie has seen, and I know those two cases aren't connected in that the first case that Debbie became familiar with the podcast because of that case, she was very close friends with the person who is missing. This case, she did not have the chance to become that close of friends with Catherine Braley because they'd only been working together a few weeks. But it was an extremely odd occurrence. And how many people have two people in their lives that they know of? One has been missing for several years, and we believe he's probably no longer with us. And one who is definitely no longer with us because she was found quickly and under a terrible situation the way she was found. So let's go back to 1988, January 15th, and in the San Fernando Valley, a 26-year-old beautiful young girl named Catherine Braley is working at a large store. We call it, so the building where this store was, there is a Target in the San Fernando Valley that we call the secret Target because it is not easily visible. You can't get to it from here. You got to go back ass roads.
Yeah, but because of that, they've got stuff that other Targets don't have.
That is correct.
Because people can't get to it.
Right.
So I'm amazed that they keep it open, but I'm happy.
It's like the worst kept secret in the valley. It's there, and we didn't know. It's one of those things you don't know about unless you're like looking online. And it was how many years ago? Like 15 years ago. We were living in Van Nuys.
Yep.
And I wanted a particular pair of Isaac Mizrahi shoes.
Right, that's right.
And producer Mark found them. He's like, hey, there's a Target here? And he found them there in my size. And so this secret Target used to be a Fedco, which I'm a little bit unfamiliar with that, but I know producer Mark knows the details.
I can tell you about Fedco is a chain of, they were like Targets. Very similar to Target, what Target is now. Um, it was designed for federal employees. If you had to be a member, and to be a member, you had to be a federal employee, or I think you could be a member if you were a family member of a federal employee. But that's what they called it, Fedco.
Okay.
And I think that I'm not sure, they may have only been here in Southern California.
Oh, okay.
I think, but that they may have been a national chain, but they were designed strictly for federal employees. So that's what it was.
So Fedco was in this, odd location, and Tipster Debbie worked in the same kind of department as Catherine Braley. And Catherine apparently lived close to where she worked and could walk home to and from work easily. It wasn't a big deal. And it wasn't like when I'm saying that this was sort of a off the beaten track, it's not like a country road. It's a pretty big through street in the San Fernando Valley going north and south. It's Sepulveda. It's a big street, right? But it's back off of the street. But so she could walk to work from her home pretty easily, unencumbered. It was well lit. Even in 1988, it was, busy. So I don't think she felt unsafe. So one day after work, January 15th, late afternoon, she stops at a bar on the way home, known to be frequented by those in law enforcement. And the name of the bar just makes me very ill, and it's called The Hunter. And it feels very much like...
Yeah, it's not a real good name, is it?
No, it feels like if you went into this bar, you may be hunted. And that's a terrible thing to say, but I can't help it. It just sounds not, But it was frequented by those in law enforcement. And there were apparently several LA County Sheriff's Department detectives in this bar in the late afternoon. And apparently early evening. And apparently they had been there for a very long time. And they were gathered together for the death of one of their own. They were detectives, I believe, in the drug enforcement area at LAX. So they'd lost a brother in arms during a drug bust, and he was an undercover officer, and they had gone to his memorial, and there were at least three that were friendly together sitting at this bar. And Catherine Braley comes in, and they end up all talking. And around 11 p.m., and they are all admittedly extremely intoxicated, they all leave together, the three LA County Sheriff's detectives and Catherine. Now, there is a report from employees at the Hunter who said they peeked through the blinds and they see just minutes after they've all walked out together, these detectives were going to walk her, outside and maybe home. No. And they see Catherine Braley, the employees of the Hunter see Catherine Braley sitting in a puddle laughing. So she had tripped and fallen, even though this one specific detective was supposed to be helping her walk. She had tripped and fallen, and she was sitting in a puddle laughing. So even the employees mention that two of the detectives seemed to peel off, Robert Waters and Mike Turner, seemed to peel off from the group and get in their cars and drive away. Robert Mallen and Catherine Braley are still in the parking lot, which is the last thing that these employees of the Hunter see. Now, again, admittedly, both were extremely intoxicated, and it's around 11 p.m. that this exit from the Hunter is supposed to have happened. A block away from the Hunter on Sepulveda Boulevard, a resident of an apartment complex, Harold Hobson, was talking to his girlfriend on the phone. He was an employee of Builder's Emporium, and he was speaking with his girlfriend on the phone, and he hears around 11:30 or so, he hears a lengthy altercation between a man and a woman right outside his apartment. At one point, he hears the woman say, "You're hurting me, Lewis," or "Turn me loose." He couldn't quite remember. And he runs outside. It sounded like something was being hit, like against a tree. It was a very loud thud. And then he thought that someone maybe had been hit by a car. So he rushes down to the street level and he looks around, but he doesn't see anything. The next morning, in a parking lot outside his apartment complex, Catherine Braley's beaten body is found. And there is a hammer next to her and a concrete block that they think was used to crush her head. So Harold Hobson, is questioned extensively by the Van Nuys Police Department detectives. And he said at one point, I didn't really feel like I was a witness. I felt like they were interrogating me. So, they were like, "Hey, you're hurting me, Lewis," or "Turn me loose." Could it have been another name? Could it have been Louis? And Mr. Hobson said, "Well, I guess some people use the nickname Louis. I don't know. I don't know, how important that is. I guess it could be Louis." And what they were going for was hoping he would say it sounded like Joey, which is the name of the person that Catherine Braley was living with, Joey Polino.
Oh, I see.
Now, he was a plumber and had tools. And, again, they were within walking distance of Fedco and of the bar. And they had lived together in a trailer. And some people say they were dating. Some people say they were roommates. I don't really know. I know that Mr. Polino is currently in prison on a robbery charge. But, there's nothing in his past that said that he was a murderer. He just, was like, she never came home. He was, like, of course, one of the first people they would speak to, especially after hearing Mr. Hobson's, "I heard a fight with a man and a woman outside." Well, what they don't know is that Robert Mallen is gone. He took his county-issued car and had sex with Catherine Braley. I mean, according to his version of it. He's married with 2 kids, by the way. And she stopped in the middle of the second sex act and said, "I've got to go," and got out of his car and was never heard from again. And he drove straight to Arizona. And the next morning, she is found in the 8100 block of Sepulveda Boulevard, about a block. And I looked on a map. Where all of this happened was within 0.8 of a mile. So the bar, the parking lot where she's found, all within 0.8 of a mile there.
So his story, when they interview him, when the LAPD interviews, and he's a sheriff's detective.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's the LAPD investigating because that's in their jurisdiction.
There you go.
Okay, so the detective's story is that he had sex with her at least once or started a second time, and then she broke it off, got out of the car, and then he drove to Arizona.
Yep.
Okay. Did he say why?
I'll get there.
Okay. Oh, my goodness.
So Catherine has been beaten, tortured, and strangled, and her head, on the wrong side of a concrete block. The hammer that was found at the scene ended up not having any evidence on it. There was a hammer missing from Joey Polino's toolkit, but they can't say that for sure it's that hammer. And they realized that Robert Mallen was the last person, to see Catherine Braley, and the 2 detectives from the Van Nuys division drive straight out to his camp in Arizona. He was there with his wife.
At a camp.
Mm-hmm. And they stop in a national park. They talk to the rangers and say, we need to talk to him. And they're like, well, you can't come in, but we can bring him up to the ranger station. Okay, well, how do we get him here? They devise a plan. Tell him one of his friends is at the ranger station and is drunk and is asking for him. And that's a ruse. And I do love the fact that the LAPD detectives used a ruse to get an LA County Sheriff's detective up to where they could speak to him.
It's an interesting ruse.
It is. Maybe it's a good way to say, hey, you got a drunk buddy here. I better go and cover his ass. I don't know. I mean, I thought it was interesting that, one of the oldest things you can do when you're in law enforcement is to use a ruse. They're trying to make it now illegal for you to lie to a suspect. But how many cases have been broken?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
When you say, Bob's going to flip on you. Well, okay, we did it. I want to flip first. Or, I don't.
Yeah. I mean, that was a Supreme Court ruling that said they could do that. I don't know how they can get around that.
Well, I'm thinking some things I'm going to shut up. But yeah, there are people working to say that you can't lie to a suspect. So they get Detective Mallen up to the ranger station. And they're like, hey, were you at a bar and you met a woman? Yeah. And what happened? Well, we had consensual sex and, twice. And then I don't remember what came first. She may have been doing this to me, or I don't remember exactly. But at the second attempt, she said, I've got to go, and got out of my car and left. Oh, well, that's a problem because she's been found murdered. Oh, I don't know what happened after she left my car. Where did you leave her? The 8100 block of Sepulveda.
Okay.
So somehow, like, she stepped out of your car and then was murdered, but you didn't see it because you were pulling away in a drunken state with your pants around your ankles, or... Yeah. Anyway, so this case gets zero attention or traction. I will tell you that all of the wonderful things I have found online, several of the really great ones have been written by the beloved Michael Connelly. Once again, the stories that, I can't believe I feel like we were so blessed to have him as a crime reporter with the LA Times because he's such a great writer. And he started covering it a year after the murder because no one gave a shit.
Wow.
This 26-year-old woman from Iowa who comes to California, is working, as a cashier at Fedco for 3 weeks, is murdered savagely and left in a parking lot like a bag of garbage to be found obliterated. And the last people she's seen with are LA County Sheriff's detectives. And who's, investigating the case? LAPD. Now, the only thing that keeps me from believing that this was intentionally not looked into is the fact that I have always heard, and maybe producer Mark can help me with this, that there's a rivalry between the LA County Sheriff's detectives and LAPD detectives.
Well, there is a rivalry. You remember that? Remember the show Southland that we used to
I
watch?
do.
Remember that episode where there was a dead body that was run over by a train? The train track was right on the line between LA City and LA County.
I don't.
And there's a sheriff's deputies on one side and LAPD on the other side, and both are trying to get the other to take care of it. They don't want to handle it.
Wow.
And they're both calling their offices, their headquarters, saying, the other guy should take care of it, right?
Wow.
So there is a rivalry. Yes.
What a place to die. What a place to die right in the middle of two different jurisdictions, right. And they're fighting over who's gonna.
Right.
Right. So the fact that the last people that we know of that saw Catherine are in law enforcement, and there's another law enforcement agency investigating this, makes it a little more layered than I can imagine. I just feel like, she wasn't a high-profile person. I just feel like this was swept way too far under, I don't even know. And what's so sad is what producer Mark was just saying. This was right near train tracks too.
Oh, well.
There's train tracks there on, Sepulveda.
Yeah.
So this is not far from train tracks. I don't know who I wish would have found her or whose jurisdiction she would have been in, but this was handled badly.
Yeah, it's all LAPD in that area.
Right,
But,
absolutely.
But it's amazing to me that how can you not come to the conclusion that it was just intentionally ignored? How can, after a year?
Well,
I mean, honestly.
Here's what happens. And Michael Conley covered it beautifully in the January 15th of 1989, a full year after the 1 year anniversary after Catherine being found. Michael Conley covers it beautifully in the LA Times. And he says that, nothing was going to push this case forward until Catherine Braley's mother, Linda Postma, files a lawsuit. In fact, the headline of the LA Times, January 15th, 1989, lawsuit fails to solve 1-year-old murder. So it had kind of become stagnant, even though LAPD Van Nuys Division detectives say, for days after the murder, we investigated Robert Mallen as well as Joey Polino and, the other detectives, and they're not, it's like no arrests were made and we're not going to discuss it. And Linda Postma hears from Catherine's friends, she left work and went to the Hunter, and there were 3 sheriff's deputies. And after so many weeks of getting nothing, Linda Postma, her mother, says, I'm filing a lawsuit. She can't get anyone to call her back. So she calls an attorney and she sues the 3 deputies in U.S. District Court, saying that she refused to have sex with them, and then they mutilated her body to confuse investigators.
So she alleged that all 3 were involved.
She does.
Okay.
You'll understand not long after what happens. She said, they violated her civil rights and acted under the color of law as their capacity as people in law enforcement. So 2 of the detectives, Waters and Turner, are dropped from the case because from witness statements at the Hunter, it becomes pretty clear that they all kind of parted ways. And, it was her and Robert Mallen. It was Catherine Braley and Robert Mallen in his car. Why would he need to have her in his car for anything other than sex, consensual or otherwise? It can be argued that it was not consensual because she was clearly intoxicated and felt okay to walk home. She didn't need a ride. And he, Robert Mallen, said that he had approximately 16 drinks that afternoon.
Oh, is that all?
16 drinks. So Linda Postma has a very unique attorney. His name is Stephen Yagman. And
I know Stephen Yagman.
I bet you do.
Yeah,
I bet you do.
He sues cops.
Yes, he does.
He does. That's what he does.
That's his entire MO, is suing cops. Now, I think he put up a pretty good case. He's definitely had his time in the spotlight. He's had his license suspended for a while because of, his actions. But he spent a large part of 1988 gathering evidence against Robert Mallen. And, so the lawsuit ended up being a hung jury. And even though Stephen Yagman says Robert Mallen's behavior, having 16 drinks, engaging in sex with her in a county-owned car, and then, quote-unquote, allowing her to walk away, even that behavior contributed to her death. So he's calling it legally responsible for the death of Catherine Braley. If he didn't physically kill her, which he still thinks he did, he should not have permitted her to leave the car. And his final question was, do we want police to behave like this? Well, no, we don't want anyone. It doesn't matter what your career. We don't want anyone to behave like this. It's a terrible thing. I've had a discussion recently with another beloved podcast host who said, I didn't know you didn't drink. I just sort of offhandedly must have said it. And I'm like, well, yeah, I don't really drink, and she goes, I don't either. And it's almost like we now have a secret club. She goes, it's amazing how many, social events are around drinks. And I'm like,
well, most social events are around
no
drinks.
kidding.
When I stopped drinking, it's 30 some odd years ago, I realized, whenever I go to any kind of event now, I'm always ending up kind of stuck in the back because everybody's drinking. It's really, and you're kind of expected to drink. It's not some sort of evil conspiracy or anything. It's just the way it is, and it's really difficult to to navigate sometimes.
It is, and I'm not judging or condemning anyone for drinking. It's just never been a thing for me. And I was really happy when I met producer Mark because, he's been sober now for a very long time, and he was sober for a decade or something when I met him. And I just, we have parties, or we used to before the pandemic, and it was BYOB, but we would always have we would always have wine or something available for people who didn't bring their own. We just don't, I don't care. I don't like it. I like my calories tangible. I enjoy eating things that are, I don't want all my calories in alcohol, but more than that, I don't like the way it makes me feel. I don't like being out of control of my body or my mind. I don't understand. If I loved the flavor of something, if I loved the taste, a lot of people love wine or champagne. That's different. Enjoy yourself, knock yourself out. But drinking to, the excess of 16 drinks in a, several hour period, that's not enjoying anything. When you enjoy something, you take your time with it. You slowly consume it. You don't, eat it like a wolf or drink it like that's just doing something to become numb. And I get it. They were, there after a memorial for a downed officer. I understand. Drinks may have been consumed. I just don't, when Stephen Yagman closes his arguments with, is this how we want police to behave? Of course not. But it's not just police. I don't want anyone to behave like this. And granted, Catherine, had some drinks. Does that mean she needs to be murdered? It's like she's vulnerable, so let's murder her. I think it's an interesting concept that Stephen Yagman thinks it's because she refused sex with them. And Robert Mallen said we had sex twice or 1.5 times.
Well, was there evidence in the autopsy that she'd had sex?
I couldn't tell you. It seems like they're not even releasing all the details, obviously. And I don't know what they did to her. I don't know if she was, I don't know how long it took to identify her. If a hammer, a concrete block, strangled, tortured, beaten, who knows if she was recognizable? I'm guessing that, there's DNA taken. Maybe he used condoms. I don't know.
Yeah.
I wish I knew. So there is this lawsuit filed, which is the only attention that Catherine's case gets. It's a terrible thing. And I do have to credit Michael Conley for finding the case and bringing it forward and saying, hey, what's going on with this? This is kind of odd, that this case has not been solved, and it involves LA County Sheriff's deputies. How can this not have been solved yet?
So he got his attention when the lawsuit failed.
Yes. When the lawsuit was finally getting, I hate to say this, finally getting attention in the papers, because it just... So a federal judge ruled that Linda Postma, who really isn't Catherine's mother, she is her stepmother, but her mother for all intents and purposes, really, could continue the lawsuit in her husband's name, even though she is not even Catherine's biological mother. So she had filed this $10 million wrongful death lawsuit on behalf of her husband, Edward Postma. He had actually filed the suit, and he was Catherine's biological father. And then he had, a few months after the suit had been filed, he passed away. The LA County sheriffs tried to say that Edward Postma wasn't Catherine Braley's biological father. It was proven that he was. That's when Linda Postma decided to drop Robert Waters and Mike Turner from the lawsuit, but she still kept Robert Mallen on. And he said really strange, I don't remember if it was oral copulation first and then sexual intercourse, but those two things did happen. I believe she quit copulating me and then said, I have to go.
Right.
So he lives in Lakewood.
Well, and Lakewood, maybe at that time of night, is an hour away from where all this happened.
I guess what doesn't make sense to me is that he said they parted company at 11:50.
Right. Oh, right. Then that doesn't make
Why
any
did
sense.
it take him 2 hours to get home in the middle of the night?
Right.
So the timing of Robert Mallen's departure from the scene would prove crucial, but the LAPD did not interview any of Robert Mallen's neighbors or his wife or anyone else that could have established what time he came home.
They didn't even interview his wife?
No.
Well, okay.
Yeah. During the trial for the lawsuit, Stephen Yagman asked one of the detectives, why didn't you ask him about, more details? And do you know what the detective said? Well, I'd been up for about 24 hours and it was a long drive. I guess I was tired.
This is what one of the LAPD detectives said.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I've been up for 24 hours and I just wasn't myself.
Yeah, I was tired. I was really tired.
That's great.
Well, then maybe you shouldn't be working on this case.
Jeez.
So there is a journalist named Edmund Newton who wrote for the LA Weekly, which was just a scorchingly wonderful, newspaperish magazine. And this is from 1995, and the title is The Death of a Deputy's Date. So he mentions that he really feels that when a case is involving someone, a fellow law enforcement officer, a lot of times those sort of details get pushed aside or not investigated. And I didn't want to believe that. I really didn't want to believe that. But something else popped up that was really odd, and that is the case of Stephanie Lazarus. So the author of a book called The Lazarus Files, A Cold Case Investigation, Matthew McGough, was working on a book about high-end art theft. So he actually met Stephanie Lazarus of the LAPD at Parker Center, where he was interviewing her pretty extensively for a book about art theft. And about a year after his interview with her, she's arrested for the murder of a woman named Sherry Rasmussen. And again, this will be a case that we're going to talk about in a few weeks, because I didn't want to cover it because other podcasts have covered it. But the connection with what happened with Catherine Braley, it seems like a loose one, but I think it all ties in. So Stephanie Lazarus was, a several decade officer. She'd been promoted. She'd been in the LAPD for over 20 years and was the last 10 years of her career had worked in this very prestigious, art theft sort of division. So she ended up, hanging around a lot of important rich people, because who has expensive art but those people? And this author, who was not just writing a book. I mean, he's a pretty cool dude. He was a script writer and a consultant for Law and Order. I mean, he's meticulous in what he does. He's a pretty fascinating guy, this author. And this book actually mentions Catherine's death and, whether we want to call it an LAPD cover-up, But he, finds a file in a small old LA Times story online when he's looking into the Stephanie Lazarus murder of Sherry Rasmussen. And he finds the lawsuit that, there were 3 weeks of testimony and it was considered a hung jury, and Linda Postma has just never been given any sort of help or closure. And Matt McGough sees, I'm pretty curious about this. What happened here? Why was this not, ever solved? It seems pretty cut and dry. Are you really telling me there's not enough evidence here? And so he looks into it. And what he finds is absolutely awful because, and it's so layered here to try and connect these two, but I'm going to do the best I can. The Stephanie Lazarus investigation, she wasn't investigated until probably almost 20 years after Sherry Rasmussen's murder. So in 2001, LA Police Chief Bernard Parks created a cold case homicide unit. And no matter what he thought was going to happen when he did this, I don't know that he thought that they would be investigating their own. And one of the detectives realizes, and I'm going to say his name is because it's all over. His name is Detective James Nuttall. And he formed a little task force, and they had to form it quietly because they're investigating one of their own. And Stephanie Lazarus was called Suspect 5. And the reason that they are investigating 5 women is because a criminalist found that the DNA from a bite mark on Sherry Rasmussen came from a woman. And the entire time, and again, I don't want to overlap these cases too much because they are both very, very layered, but we'd be here for 5 hours, which we're going to cover Sherry Rasmussen's murder in another episode. But this criminalist said it's a female profile. And the entire time they had labored under the assumption that Sherry Rasmussen was a surprised burglar, a male, potentially a team of males, and was murdered that way. But she was murdered in such an awful, aggressive, angry way. Why would 2 robbers murder someone over a CD player and a VCR? In a really awful way, bludgeoning and shooting her. And it was an assassination. Let's just call it that. So Detective Nuttall and his group are investigating 5 women in Sherry Rasmussen's life. One of them turns out to be Stephanie Lazarus, who had dated Sherry Rasmussen's husband previously in college. They follow her to Costco and they get her cup, and it matches. And get her cup out of the garbage can. It matches, and they call her in under the guise of saying, "We need your help." And they take her down to an interrogation room where producer Mark reminded me, you have to leave your weapons outside. And they do that so they can speak to her so she doesn't end up in a, some sort of a situation where she's, a standoff or something. So that's a separate case. But what happened is, after this case is solved and adjudicated, and Detective Nuttall and Jennifer Francis, the criminalist, and everyone who contributed, proves without a shadow of a doubt that Stephanie Lazarus killed Sherry Rasmussen, Catherine Braley's files end up suspiciously on Jim Nuttall's desk. He doesn't know how they got there. They just arrive one day. And he starts digging into Catherine Braley's case. And because he had such success with Sherry Rasmussen, I believe he was either going to find a way to solve the case, or maybe already was on that path, when suddenly his superiors take Catherine's case away from him.
Oh, okay. So to summarize, okay. So in the Lazarus case, you had one dedicated detective who worked hard to prove that a fellow officer committed a murder like 20 years before. Just really dug into a cold case and had Lazarus arrested. She was tried, she was convicted, and that kind of goes against that blue code that you don't screw a fellow officer. And so now somebody obviously who thought within the LAPD who thought that this case that happened on Sepulveda Boulevard all these years later was being covered up, stuck the file on his desk, and he starts looking into it, and then suddenly it's removed. It's taken away from him.
Yes.
Okay.
And no one will ever explain why or answer or address it.
Oh, my God.
But I can't help but think there's... it pains me. It pains me to say this. And do I believe that most people in law enforcement are good? Yes, I do. Do I believe there is a code that you don't go against your brothers? Yes, I do. Do I believe people go against their brothers in the different agencies when they do something like this? I would hope so. I mean, that's why there's, internal affairs, which I have heard absolutely nothing good about. It seems to me that they run down tiny infractions and large things are left, uncovered.
I mean, what the hell? And Nuttall wasn't with Internal Affairs, was he?
No. Bernard Parks, Cold Case Division, asked him to look into Sherry Rasmussen's murder.
And he stumbled onto the fact that a cop killed Rasmussen.
in his, his not exact department, but yeah. There's an amazing history of this story in Vanity Fair, a very well done, very lengthy article. And it lines it up, there's a little too much of Stephanie Lazarus testimony in it, which is a lot of ums and that I don't particularly care for. But what is amazing to read about is what Jim Nuttall had to do in his own department. He had to find a group of other detectives. I think it's 3 others. So there were 4 of them working on this case. And when they find 5 women that in Sherry's life that they can, look at, and they find, I'm just going to tell you, they find nothing in the file about Stephanie Lazarus. She was never talked to, questioned, nothing. There's one line in the over 1,000 pages of information on Sherry's case. One line Jim Nuttall sees. Father called in to report Sherry's husband's ex-girlfriend, S. Lazarus P.O. And he's like, P.O., police officer? That's it.
And the thing is, and we'll look at because I remember this case now that you're talking about it. When we talk about this case, you'll find out that there was just all kinds of evidence and testimony.
Oh my God!
That Lazarus was insanely jealous and was absolutely stalking Sherry Rasmussen.
She did. She showed up at her place of business, which was a hospital, saying, I slept with them while they were engaged. You better stay away because he's always going to be mine. Showed up in their home.
And so none of this showed up in the file.
Absolutely none of it. One line.
And Nuttall's team had to discover all this.
Yep.
So,
and he would not speak to the detectives who handled Sherry Rasmussen's case because, in his words, I did not trust them.
Yeah, and so he solved it. He got her convicted.
Yep.
And so now somebody sends him a new case. Somebody internally sends him a new case because obviously somebody internally thinks this one's being covered up.
Yep.
And, okay.
So here's the conundrum with Catherine Braley's case. Her friends had gathered $1,500 together, some of her friends and people who worked at the Hunter. And they asked Linda Postma, where do we have people call on tips for Catherine's murder? We have this $1,500 reward. And Linda Postma says, I don't know. Where would you call to submit a tip to two different agencies that you feel are covering for each other and are not going to work on your daughter's case?
Oh, that's so tragic.
I know somebody here in Southern California knows. I'm going to give you a number to the California Attorney General, Department of Justice. And this number can be anonymous. And I don't care where you work. I don't care if you're with the LAPD or the Sheriff's Department, or you worked at Fedco, or you lived on Sepulveda. If you know anything about the murder of Catherine Braley, please call 1-800-952-5225. And more cowbell.
If you'd like to support this podcast, go to patreon.com/Just the Tipsters.